Electric Cafe.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Electric Cafe. In this video, I'll be reviewing Higher Intelligent Agency and their 1993 album called Colourform. Higher Intelligent Agency was also known as HIA, and they did a few albums in the early 90s on a label called Beyond Records, and then there was an American, sister label that also released quite a few of the early releases that they both shared called Waveform Records. And if I rewind a couple years before that, in like 1991, I started to hear some evolution of some dub music and stuff like that, and sort of the reggae side and dub side, but more the Jamaican side. And somewhere along the lines of the early 90s, I started to be influenced into ambient music and early techno music and the early chill out scene. And I really, at the time, I just fell in love with that sound. And you can see my stack of Waveform and Beyond Records CDs right here. But it all started for me back in 1994 when I first heard this compilation called 2AD. Again, which was on Waveform Records. And so Beyond Records started in late 92 out of UK. And at first they started out as sort of a little bit of ambient dub and dub, but with a little bit more of a spacey element and a little bit of a psychedelic element, but not too much. But it was kind of like almost like a early style of like ambient Goa or ambient, a little bit more like ambient trance or something like that. It was really just based in the chill out scene that I really fell in love with again at the time. And it was kind of a combination of techno and dub and ambient music, and also very futuristic and very spacey. And so Beyond Records started in 1993 or late 92, and they started out with these really good ambient dub series, and they had about 4 volumes of this. Each one had a separate name, like Jellyfish or what have you. And so after I got this one in 1994, I went back and got all the ambient dub records, and then I followed the label religiously through the 90s, and it was one of those records. And it's really interesting to think about how a label started in UK, and if I'm not mistaken, Waveform was out of Arizona, because if I'm not mistaken, on the Waveform, the bottom, it would say it was based out of Arizona, if I'm not mistaken. And I always thought that was a interesting connect. I don't think there was any label in the early 90s that was supporting electronic music that was in Arizona and UK. It was really different. But somewhere along the lines, about 1995, Beyond Records closed in the UK, and Waveform continued on through the mid 90s, but then it had some periods of where it came and then went. So I think it stopped somewhere around 1999, and then they picked up around 2004, and then they had another. They did some other releases for another 10 years, and then they stopped, and they came back for a couple, like 2 records. I think there was in 2018 or 2020, somewhere around there. They're in here somewhere, but there's still a few that I didn't get around to getting. But around probably 2004, I ended up buying probably about half of the CDs. I also do have a good amount of vinyl. Here's the original copy of Colourform, the album I'm reviewing today, and this got reissued probably about 3 years ago. Higher Intelligent Agency also had a second album called Free Floater. And then through the 90s, they had a couple releases with Biosphere, Geir Jensen, and did a couple really excellent albums with Geir Jensen, who was in Biosphere and also did some early Bleep techno under the name Bleep, and then also he used to be in Belcanto, which I featured on my channel. Who's Geir Jensen? I can't say enough about. Just an amazing producer under Biosphere, and Bobby Bird was it's BYRD, was in Higher Intelligent Agency. And back in the early 90s, and especially if you look at Beyond Records, they had a really solid release schedule and a lot of great names in ambient dub and ambient techno in those years. And I do feel like there's a little bit of a I feel like there's some confusion. Maybe this is maybe on a little bit of a side note, but I do feel like there's a confusion when it comes to what's IDM and what's ambient dub or ambient techno. Like to me, when I think of like, I don't want to get too much on a tangent. I could do another video about this, but when I think of IDM, I think of jittery beats. And even though ambient techno and IDM sort of started both in like 92, 93, and it is part of that artificial intelligence and that warp sound and that B12 and Autech and Aphex Twin and stuff like that. The later Aphex Twin, like Window Licker and Drugs and stuff like that, and even later Autech, that is so much more different than something like this. And some people still consider this IDM for some reason. And I don't really get that because it's the spacey, it's a lot slower. There's a lot more acid in here. You don't get a lot of acid sounds in IDM. Also, it's more linear. It's not so fast or I almost think more IDM is almost more influenced by drill and bass and drum and bass in a way with the patterns of the beats more so than ambient dub or ambient techno, which is more linear. And so I've never really understood why people label early waveform stuff like IDM or Beyond Records. It's definitely an ambient dub. It's definitely chill out. That's kind of the scene that I fell in love with. I wanted to support. I'm wearing my label shirt right now, but Rediscovery. I reissued a Positive Life on this label, so this label was really important for me in that time. And around 91, 92, I started to hear bands or acts that like Rockers Hi-Fi, and which I'll have to do some reviews on some of their albums, especially their early 90s albums were very influential for me. And they were featured on quite a few of the ambient dub compilations that Beyond Records did, and they were probably the biggest artists on the early period, or at least the compilations on Beyond Records. And so they were one of the ones that kind of helped me kind of learn kind of the ambient dub side and sort of the UK side of ambient dub. And I can't really speak for UK people because I'm not from UK, but if I rewind back to 1992, one time I took a vacation to Florida. I don't want to get too off subject, but it's kind of related to my understanding of ambient dub. So in 1992, the summer of 1992, I was 16 years old, and I visited in Florida, and it was it was the first rave I went to in 1992, the first party I went to that was playing electronic music. I was already very into techno, but I never really heard the word rave. I was 16, I was a little bit too young to go. I started going to some parties that were sort of like raves in like 95, 96, but I was never really the club goer. I went to a lot of warehouse parties in 96, 97. Once I got to like 20, 21 and started going out a little bit more. But when I was 15, 16, 17, I really didn't know too much about the actual club scene. And so when I was in Florida visiting, I went to my first quote unquote rave, and it was more on the beach actually, strangely enough, and it was amazing. And I met some people from UK, and a lot of people. I don't know if it's still like that, but UK, a lot of people would vacation in Florida and in Jamaica, and that was sort of like the closest place for them to really, kind of get that, that kind of summer warm island. Like it was more like a vacation, kind of like us in California. We went to like Hawaii or maybe went down to Mexico or something like that. So that was kind of the closest things for UK. So every time I went to Florida over the years, like my parents met in Florida, and my parents are from New York, but they met in Florida and got married in Florida, then moved to California in 1967, I think it was. But so I have a lot of roots in Florida. My mom's sister lives in Florida and stuff like that, and so that was the first place I heard people talk about rave. And I remember I met these two girls, and we kind of fooled around and stuff like that. It was a really great time, and I met her at the party, and she definitely took advantage of me. She was a little bit older than me, not to go into words, but she said, do you know about rave music? And I was like, no, what's that? And so she had her boombox, and she was playing it. I was like, oh, you mean techno? And I was like, I love techno. And she goes, no, this is rave music. And I was like, whatever. I mean, I guess it's techno to me. And so, but now I kind of know that there is kind of a rave version and kind of a techno because, when you think of rave, you think of that. I wouldn't think of like Mickey Mouse gloves and stuff like that, but kind of that. I wouldn't even say like chip tune, but it was kind of that hardcore, that rave sound of UK from like 1990. I wouldn't even say the Belgian sound of like 1990 or 91, but more so that the hardcore with piano breakdowns and stuff, that hardcore 1992 period UK. But there was a lot of influence in dub in those sounds and the raga sound and hardcore and jungle and stuff like that. It all kind of came from the ties of Jamaica, and I suppose it's from people in Europe and UK sort of vacationing in Jamaica and things like that, and maybe even Florida, that sort of got a little bit of that island flavor and brought it back and took it into their sounds. And I also later on I would realize that, or I would hear that that happened with Basic Channel with Mark or Ernestus. And I'm blanking on the other guy from Basic Channel. But anyways, one of the two, if I'm not mistaken, vacationed a lot in Jamaica, and that's where they took the Jamaican sound. I think maybe even Wolfgang Voigt did that, who was in Gas. And so they sort of took that and brought it into techno and made started some of the first dub techno. And so everybody seems to be kind of influenced by that dub sound, and that may go all the way back to the late '70s when you think of like Police and the whole ties to ska music and dance hall music and that all ties with dub music and things like that. So there's always been a UK influence from Jamaica as far back as probably the early '70s, even with a lot of like rocksteady and ska music. And I'm not super versed on the early '70s when it comes to that, but that's what I feel like as an electronic fan. There's certainly a lot of ties there, and I would love to hear somebody who's really into like rocksteady in UK. If you have some comments about that kind of early '70s and how that influenced bands like Police or just ska in general, or like the Specials, or just that whole scene that influenced UK and even bands like the Clash and stuff like that were influenced by dub. You can hear it in a lot of like things like Rock Combat, Rock the Casbah, stuff like that. All that stuff has a lot of reggae influences and dub influences in that. So all that stuff ties with the early sound of UK being influenced by Jamaican sounds. And here, it did that with ambient techno, and that became kind of an ambient dub, and I really got into this sound a lot. And so I continued to follow Waveform records, throughout for the rest of my life, and there was periods of pockets where they had a lot of great music, a lot of really good ambient dubs, and I'm sure I'll get to reviewing a lot of these albums in the near future. But strangely enough, I have a friend who started following my label, and he's the one who recommended me reviewing this, and he's a gentleman named Pierre, and he's out of Berlin, and he's actually definitely has an entrepreneurial spirit and wants to start his own label coming up. And so we got a chance to talk a little bit about that. I kind of gave him some of my thoughts and some of my experiences on starting a label, and if I could help in any way. But he's a genuine, really nice person, and he wanted to support the channel and gave me an album to recommend, and he picks Colourform, which isn't a total surprise because if he likes my label and what I put out, this is right in my wheelhouse. I mean, this is the fourth record I think I put out was A Positive Life, from Waveform, from Beyond Records. So, he's definitely, somebody that is right on my level when it comes to what we're really interested in and wanting to share again, as far as like reissuing. So, hopefully, I'm sure he'll do a great job with his label if or when he starts it, and I'll definitely support it here in the future when he comes out. I definitely like to maybe have him as a guest once he starts the label and maybe share some of the releases that he's making. But I really appreciate it. Thank you, Pierre, for recommending something, and I'm going to give you my overall thoughts on and probably go into depth on each track. I do have a lot to say on this video. So one of the things that I really like about this particular album and this particular sound, this definitely represents the sound. This is what is widely considered one of the best early ambient dub records. You know, some people say IDM. Again, I have to not say that, but you know, it's considered one of the best chill out albums of the early '90s. It's often chosen as one that would meet a lot of people's top 10 or top 20 favorite chill out records from the early '90s. And one of the great things I like about this particular sound that this album represents is I love the looseness in the '90s ambient techno sound. It's kind of space age, yet it feels organic. It's almost at the beginning of the digital age, and if you'll hear me talk a lot about early '90s ambient techno and ambient music and dub music, you'll hear a lot of times me talk about this is the first period of, you know, when you think of the late '80s, you think of people going into the studio and stuff like that and needing money to go to studio time and rent studio time. They didn't necessarily have all the equipment to make an album. By the time 1993 hits, like, people are pretty deep, or not, I wouldn't say deep, but in the first couple of years of creating their own studios at home. And when they have a lot more time to play with music and tinker with it, you know, you started to hear more albums than people would go into a studio and make like a track, right? Because they only had 5 hours and, okay, I want to do 3 tracks. Let's bust it out and see if we can get it done in 5 hours. Well, now they're at home playing with sounds. They have all the time in the world. So now you started to see more albums come out, more long form albums, more longer tracks, you know, stuff like this. So this was kind of at the beginning of what I call the digital age. So you still have a lot of analog equipment, you know, but it's starting to be blended into digital. You know, it's starting to be, people are starting to use computers a lot more by 1990, 91, 93. But, you know, the computers around the mid 80s. But by the time the early '90s came around, you know, people were using Cakewalk and a lot more MIDI and stuff like that. So, you know, there was a lot more balance of analog and digital at that particular time, and it's really kind of, for me, it's a fascinating time because the combination of two, you got the analog sounds, but you got the digital processing, the digital, you know, maybe. Because when I think of like analog, I think of the looseness or a more warmer feel, right? When you think of digital, you think of a colder feel, a little bit more, but more exact, right? More maybe mathematical, more on point, more, you know, just more exact, right? So you have the combination of the two, right? And they blend perfectly. One of the things also, like with my label and my logo here, is it's inspired a lot by the Apollo artwork, right? It's also got a little bit of a Lego feel. If you know the early space logo of Legos, like when they had this little space guy with the circle around the moon, it was kind of inspired for my logo, but it was also kind of Apollo patch oriented with the patches and stuff like that. So I kind of helped or designed this, even though my friend designed it. I kind of wanted it to be a representation of both of those. When I think of this particular sound and this particular time, when I think of space music, like, I would almost say this is like the Mariner program. If you know the evolution of the space program, this is very early on. This is lots of bleeps, lots of space sound, a lot of times what I call is like space junk, or it feels like you're in a space capsule and you're sort of bouncing around and there's like zaps and bleeps and, you know, stuff going on your console, on your, you know, and different warning lights, but outside you're just sort of like stuff happening and maybe like a shooting star or something, just all these kind of like spacey sound effects. This is what I pictured when I would listen to this kind of music and sort of get, you know, like just escape to. It was such an amazing time. I was 16, 17 at the time, and hearing all these new sounds. That's one of the things that was so amazing about the early '90s, and that's why rave music really stuck. If you rewind back to like Woodstock, right? Like, you had guitars, right? What made Woodstock in that period so exciting, right? It was new sounds, right? Those guitar players were putting things through pedals and feedback and learning how to use their amplifiers as instruments. And so you just had this whole new, this whole new sounds that nobody had heard before, right? Maybe even early digital effects, and so that's what made Woodstock in that whole period so exciting for those people that were playing music. And then you think of like krautrock and early progressive rock, just sounds that nobody had heard before, just really excited people about that music. That's the reason why rave music, techno and electronic music is so exciting, because these were sounds that you never heard before. And so me being really into sci-fi growing up, with movies, growing up through Star Wars and, Buck Rogers and, all the things that I loved about space music. You can see the movie Black Hole up here. That was one of my favorite movies as a kid. Loved that movie. So I was just really into sci-fi, anything that was kind of spacey. So I was always hearing kind of in my head the soundtracks to space music as I grew up. And I liked ambient music and soundtrack music even before I really got into Tangerine Dream, when I was maybe, the first time I heard Tangerine Dream when I was I don't know, maybe like 10, 9, somewhere somewhere early on there. I can't even remember, but it's just ambient music's always been kind of in the back of my head because it's been the soundtrack. I've talked about space, the ride at Disneyland before, Space Mountain, the music in the background and the audio in the background of that ride that really set the ambiance of you getting on that ride and stuff like that. So there was music and sounds that I was always really interested in. So when I got into this music and started to hear stuff like this, my mind and my excitement for this type sound was it just blew me away. It just made me really a fan of electronic music, and I felt like as a 17-year-old time, like I had really found the music that I wanted to follow for the rest of my life. Like it was almost it was just game changing. It was more so than techno. Like I always really liked melody. So early on at 91, 92, I've talked a lot about my love of early trance music before it got cheesy, but I just love melody. And when I really got into more deeper ambient music and not just the new age stuff of the 80s, and started getting a little bit more into understanding like modulars and things like that, and the differences of early Roland keyboards and Jupiter 8s and stuff like that, all these amazing machines that did these amazing sounds, and then I heard it like in an ambient dub album and stuff like this, just blew me away in so many ways. So when I look at some of the tracks and just my thoughts on some of them, starts out with Delta, a really strong opener. It almost has, I don't know if anybody hears this also, but it feels like a version of Kraftwerk's Autobahn. There's like some spacey cars kind of zooming by, and it has that sort of like slow gallop to it that it kind of sounds like the early beginnings of electronic. It reminds me a lot of Autobahn for those reasons. Just kind of has that kind of drive along feel, and cars kind of moving around and stuff like that. You can almost see the blinking lights on a sequencer when you hear this song. It's just very, very, very early electronic music. It just kind of it's just really gentle and really nice and really pleasant on the ears too. And that's one thing that you get a lot about early ambient music like this. I mean, chill out music like this from the early 90s. Just very, very easy on the ears, very floaty, very relaxing, and definitely stuff you can kind of space out to. And that was kind of the chill out sound, just a great sound for the time. And then you go into Speed Learn, which to me was sort of the single of the album. It was the most probably licensed song from this particular album. It was featured on Reform. That's the Higher Intelligence Agency EP that sort of it went out about a few months after this, maybe almost a year after this. But that one features Odd Tech on a remix, Pentatonic, who I followed a lot in those early days. Also, I think Biosphere is on there, and then Mixmaster Morris, also known as Irresistible 4. But most people know that EP because of the title track, Speed Learn, and that one has a different remix on it. But the original Speed Learn is quintessential chill out UK sound for the time. It almost reminds me of Air Liquids, if there was no gravity, or Little Fluffy Clouds by The Orb is probably the most popular in that vein. Speed Learn is that sound. It kind of has the girl vocals in the background, and it kind of has that floaty kind of ambient dub feel, and very almost kind of whimsical, but it has a nice bass line to it, very catchy. Um, but just total quintessential UK chill out music for 1993 when you think of like the Orb and things like that. Just totally in that vein. And then you have track number 3 called Influx. The spacey dub feel on here is excellent. Almost verges on an experimental rhythm in some ways. There's almost an uncomfortability with the sound too. It's kind of a little bit mysterious, a little bit eerie, and that's one thing that if you hear me talk about raves in general, like going to raves in those days, raves were kind of dangerous. Yeah, I know a lot of UK people talk about this, but it was like that in California when we went to these warehouse raves and stuff like that. It was very dangerous. They were obviously they were underground raves, and in warehouses there was no security, there was really no bouncers, police. They were underground parties. Like a lot of the drugs were dangerous, people were dangerous. You'd never know if it would get broken up by the police. It was just very dangerous in a way, and there was an element in the music that was dangerous, and that's missed a lot today. And I talk about that as one of the most important things to a lot of the rave music and the early warehouse music in the early 90s, and that also blended into the ambient dub scene and the chill out scene. There was kind of a dangerous feel, or at least a mysterious and eerie and spacey kind of unknown feeling about it. When you think about space, right? You think of everything you know about space. It's not just the wonderment of space, right? Or the awe that you would get if you were floating in space, or watching a planet get born or something like that. When you think of like the sci-fi element of it, but it's also dangerous, right? I mean, there's a lot of crazy things that happen in space. Like, you know what I mean? It's just, you can think of all the things that happen. So it's dangerous. Space travel is dangerous. So to have that element in the sound of space music is so important. And that's, again, something that I'm feeling is missed a lot in newer ambient music, is that kind of element of being dangerous, of being eerie, of being mysterious, not just being dark or being happy. It's those are feelings too. Those are probably the more extreme feelings, but there's also the exciting part in the middle, right? The eeriness, the mysteriousness, the unknown, right? That kind of in between moment of those more extreme moods of being happy, or being scared, or feeling like you're going to die or something like that, right? Or maybe it's the extreme ecstasy of finding, what the meaning of life is, right? Or what made the solar system. Like, you kind of always think of like those big picture things when I thought of like space music, or just space in general. And so that sci-fi feeling, you kind of thought of, the beginnings of mankind, or figuring out what caused the planets to be made. That's, it's kind of that huge kind of like unknown, right? So that's kind of the euphoria with space music and stuff like that. So that's what's great about space music is it represents all those feelings. And when you listen to the music, it kind of incorporates all those feelings. And one of the most important is not the extremes of being sad or being lonely, right? But or being euphoric and feeling triumphant, or feeling like you conquered something and put your flag on Mars or something like that. This is all about the journey and the time in between, right? Because space travel takes a long time, right? You can't get to Jupiter, or you can't get to Io and plant your flag on the place, although it'd probably burn up in Io because it's flames, constant volcanoes and stuff like that. But you get what I'm saying. Like, space travel is about the trip and stuff like that. And that's what's great about meandering, kind of long ambient tracks. And that's why I really gravitated towards the longer tracks. And you would see like experiments and sounds and stuff like that. And track number 6 is a good example of that, of that kind of sound. It's kind of meandering, and it's called Orange, and it's just kind of meandering space music with kind of bleeps and sound effects and stuff like that. Just really cool stuff. Track number 4, acid ambient stuff. I've always been a huge proponent of acid and being part of ambient music and being part of ambient techno. One of the things that I really like, and I talk about it occasionally when it comes to when an ambient comes up, or I'm sorry, when acid comes up, when acid comes in techno, or you think of acid techno or acid trance and stuff like that. I love when acid lines are supporting the main line. I'm not necessarily a huge fan of acid house when it just becomes overly acid for no reason, and some of that is in the acid house sound. I certainly like some acid house, but I'm maybe not a huge acid house fan because that to me that it's just kind of overdone a lot in some of those tracks. And when the acid, one of the great things about a lot of the early chill out sound and trance is those acid sounds were supporting the melody, supporting the rhythm, and so there's a really nice layering and blend. Spectro's a perfect example of that. The acid line is just perfectly placed in there, and it's supporting it in equal measure as well as being part of the lead. Love the melody, love the groove, love the way it evolves really gently and really nicely on this track. Really good stuff. And then you have track number 5 called Conoid Tone. Again, that feeling of being thrown around in space, being in a time capsule, floating around, spacey sounds, bleeps, pings. But there's also a nice funky element in that rhythm that's important to note, and I wanted to point out because it's so gritty. It almost feels like there's like an electro feel in that, and that's pretty exciting because that's something that you don't hear a lot in ambient dub for that time, and it's something that's coming out more in the newer years. Is electro really, kind of when you think of the early electro is more tied towards hip hop, right, in the early '80s and stuff like that. But as it got more popular through the '90s and 2000s and stuff like that, more tied with techno and becoming more sci-fi. Like this track, the deeper groove, it's almost funky, but it feels like it's like an electro feel. It's really gritty in there, and it's very cool the way it evolves. But really good track again. Love the melody in here. Again, that kind of uneasy, meandering kind of melody in here. Just it's very celestial in this one as well. Very cool. And then again, you have that track Orange. I just spoke about that one. Meandering space music, bleep, sound effects, really cool. And then you have the track number 7. Again, a little interlude, kind of a element of math and space in here. With the equation on the title, like I was talking about earlier, just totally works with that spacey kind of feel and that sort of theme of math music and space music. Then you have track number 8 called Re-Echo. Heavy ambient dub on this one. This one has not probably, this one definitely has the biggest acid sound in here. The melody almost evolves into early trance, almost goes into an early Goa sound or early Psy style of Psy ambient, like it's almost alien-like. This one's verging on that kind of early Goa sound, 1993. Goa is becoming big in 94, 95, 96, moving into Psy and stuff like that. So this is right in line with that stuff, maybe like Juno Reactor and stuff like that of that period, like 1993. And then you have the last track called Ketamine Entity, very, very tied to, obviously raves with that name. Even deeper bass, though. Has a little bit of a breakbeat, dubby, rolling drums, really good stuff. One nice thing about this particular album, too, and it is the use of 808 bass lines. Or 808 bass. Like, that's something that's really been lost in the last 30 years is the 808 bass. When, growing up in California in the late 80s, like when I first got into like getting out and going out of the town, like when I was like maybe 14 or 15 and sort of seeing what's out there, I was really inspired by you couldn't really escape, being in California, the lowrider scene. Like the lowrider scene came all the way from the early 70s with like War with lowrider and stuff like that. Just a part of the California culture. If you were in California and you were teenagers in the 70s, 80s, you could not escape the lowrider scene. And by the later 80s, electro was part of it. Freestyle music was a huge part of it. The Latin influence in the dance music and freestyle music at the time. Everything from Chenier to Nucleus to Prince to, just all kinds of stuff. Sheenie Easton, all kinds of freestyle music. Madonna, whatever. Well, all kinds of stuff. So there was disco. There was freestyle music, but also as the late '80s came, when hip hop really kind of came in strong in the middle '80s, and it's it was featured a lot with a deeper 808 bass, especially when it got to like Public Enemy, LL Cool J, Beastie Boys, things like that. Like, it had a deeper 808 bass, and so me as a 10-year-old in 1986, and hearing like Beastie Boys and License to Ill. I think I have a cassette of License to Ill up there. I don't know if you can see it, but I don't know if it's up there right now. Can hardly see it. I think it's up there. But the use of 808 bass, so which was one of the things that I really liked mostly about hip hop at that particular time, and as that sort of gravitated into techno bass in the later '80s, and sort of mixing with Miami bass, right? Even when you think of like Luke Skywalker and Two Live Crew, but also Dynamics X, and just the whole Miami sound, that was coast to coast. That was just it was just totally tied with Miami sound to Los Angeles. We were just both coasts were just really inspired by the lowrider scene, and then ultimately speaker competitions. Like, I can't tell you how much, like 1988 to like 1992, 93, all my friends had huge systems in their car. Like, I remember when I got my car in 1992, and it was my birthday, and well, what did I want for birthday? I wanted some bass in my car. I didn't have a lot of money, but I went and got a 210 kicker, 10 inches, and a Rockford Fosgate punch amp, and some Polk audio mids and highs, and I had a detachable face. Which, if you guys know car stereos, I could do a whole video on car stereos back in those days. But if you guys remember in the late '80s, they had the pull-out stereos where you pulled the whole stereo out. You would see people carrying it around. You're like, oh, that's cool. And that was so like, so people wouldn't steal it, because I mean, car stereo theft was like, and so everybody had car alarms back in those days, but I had one of the early detachable face ones, especially for a cassette player, and so I was deep into the speaker competitions, and all my friends had, crazy speaker setups. I had one friend that had 12-inch Pioneer subwoofers in the back of his. It was like a. I'm trying to think. It was like a. I can't remember what kind of car it was. But it was like a big Blazer, but it was just like a wall, and of course he had a big, back on it, and it fit all those speakers, and they all. I mean, he'd put it. He had actually even an early remote, and he could do the volume and do the bass, and he could put the remote on the side, and it would just vibrate and bounce off. That's how much bass he was in. But I had one friend that had a Blazer, and he had one. It was like 1,000-watt SoundStream amp to one. I'm blanking on the name. One Serwin Vega 18-inch woofer. I've never heard deeper bass from a 1,000 watt to a 118-inch Serwin Vega. It was so deep. The bass was so deep. My brother had a couple, two Rockford Fosgate 12-inch speakers with a Punch 150 amp in like 1991. And so he had some bass in his car. I had another friend, with 410s, Serwin Vega 10s with really nice setup and amps. Like, all my friends had really nice car stereos. So that was so influential, and bass music was so great. Techno based, Bass Boy, Techmaster PB, all those things, all the bass music. But long story short, all the bass music kind of, one of the things that I really liked about the ambient dub and got me into it was also it was using a deeper bass, and I love that. So you hear a lot of deeper bass in this album, and Higher Intelligent Agency a lot. They just used some 808 bass on that, and I feel like that's so missing nowadays with a lot of even ambient dub. A lot of ambient dub doesn't really use 808 bass lines anymore, or 808 bass, not like how they used to. And this is a great example. You'll hear quite a bit of that on this album, like on tracks Spectral or Delta, or I think Influx has that as well. Just some really cool. So I wanted to mention that really quickly. Just that's one of the great things about this album is the 808 bass. When I think of the opportunities of the album, there isn't much here. It's a very strong, consistent album. I really like it. You'll see my scores on each track. Sorry to be a little long-winded on this album. I have a lot to say when it comes to this period, and this is strangely enough, this is probably, I think this is the first ambient dub or ambient chill out record I've really reviewed. So, kind of going off on a tangent and giving some of my overall thoughts on chill out style and this particular time and that I really loved. But as far as like any opportunities, particularly with this album, there's only two things that I think of as opportunities. I wish it was a little bit more of a dynamic recording. It's very of the period, so there's nothing at fault there. It's just I wish it was a little bit more dynamic in the recording, but that's not a fault of the producer. It's just of that time. It's just a little flat sounding. When you consider recordings over the years or what have you. But it'd be interesting if it was mastered in here without making it too loud. I don't know if this. I'm sure Bobby Bird, knowing the type of producer he is, he's probably pretty thorough. And I would imagine. I haven't heard the new version of this. I don't know if he touched it up or mastered it all when he reissued it or he put it on his digital. You can find it if you'd like to purchase it on his Bandcamp page. Maybe I'll probably put a link down below so you can support him if you'd like to buy this album. Or check out other music from a higher intelligence agency, Bobby Bird. Fantastic producers. Definitely check out his stuff with Biosphere again. But it'd be interesting. I don't know if he remastered this for the reissue. That's one of the things I'm not sure about. I'm more tied to the original version. I didn't buy the reissue. You can see I have original CD right here, original vinyl, so I never got around to getting the reissue. But the second thing I would say as far as an opportunity, I do wish there was a 10th track on here. This album is pushing 57, 60 minutes, so it's definitely a full album. Not overly long, not overly short. It's definitely tied to ambient dub length album. But I do wish there was if I had any kind of small wish of this particular album, I wish there was an intro. Track number 7 is about a minute and a half. Nice interlude, really cool. But I wish there was one on the beginning of this and kind of set up the album in some kind of way. Just kind of, it would just kind of be that cherry on top, that extra kind of set the tone for this. It would make it 10 tracks and it would just kind of like set the mood a little bit more. Kind of going into Delta, I feel like maybe there was an opportunity there to sort of, I guess, kind of give the album the sort of introduction that it really needed versus just kind of going into track number 1, if that makes sense. Those are only two really small critiques I have about the album. When I think of the overall album, just a very consistent album. There's really no lows in here. There's no lows in here. I wouldn't say there's any moments that really blow you away either. It's just a very consistent, nice, well-produced, great ideas in here. Very consistent album. It's just, quote unquote, I put down here, a floaty ambient dub gem of the early 90s. Regularly featured in people's top 10, regularly noted as one of the best 90s ambient album. You'll see my score here. It's definitely a high-rated album here, and it kind of sets the tone for everything that I'm going to review in the future related to the style or even 90s music or just ambient dub in general or ambient music. This definitely kind of sets the bar as far as something I can compare to and see if it's better than this or close to. This is a good album to sort of gauge. So in another roundabout way, I want to thank Pierre for doing that, because this is a perfect album to sort of jump me into the channel into doing reviewing this particular album, which is again a part of my youth and an album that I regularly go to and love. And again, you'll see my scores and then my overall rating of the album. I'm sorry to make this video a little bit long, but yeah, it's my thoughts. I'm really curious to hear what you think of this album and what your thoughts are. If you've never heard this album, I would really love to hear what you think about this album if this is your first time hearing. I know people will probably say, oh, I love this album, and that's great to hear, and I would definitely encourage that, and I would love to hear that as well. But I would love for somebody to hear this for the first time and give their overall thoughts on this album and rate it along with me. And so, yeah, let's get right into it. Here's track number 1 called Delta. This is the Higher Intelligence Agency Colourform from 1993 on Beyond Records and also the sister label Waveform Records.
We have conceived